I'm going to show you the settings that I use in my copy of Photoshop. I'm currently using Creative Cloud 2019, and it's fine to use older versions of Photoshop or newer versions of Photoshop. That shouldn't cause you too many problems. If you have newer ones, it won't cause any problems at all. You'd have to have a much older version of Photoshop in order to encounter any difficulties. The newest thing that we're going to be using in this class is most likely Smart Objects, and that was introduced way back in 2006. So you should be okay even with versions of Creative Suite 6, I believe, should have everything that you need, for example. In this, if you start using older versions of Photoshop, you may need to go online and do some research to figure out where things are. If you have newer versions of Photoshop, that's fine. They'll be where these are. In the event that a new version of Photoshop has something moved around, I'll just give a little update as to where those are so you don't have to worry about it. I did want to show you my settings though, because I tend not to use the default settings, and if you like the way that I have it set up, I want you to be able to do that too. You don't have to follow along though otherwise. I'm also going to go over a few of the general settings and preferences, but if you already feel super comfortable with these, you can skip this video and not worry about it at all. To begin, I'm going to go ahead and just create a new document so that I can see everything as it goes. And voila, we have the palette layouts. All of these are palettes, if you haven't heard that term in a while. They all have little flyouts. These used to be called donuts in some versions of Adobe products, and now they're just flyout menus. And you can click on those on any of the palettes. Those palettes are controlled under the window, and so you can turn on or off any of these. For example, the Learn, it's gone, it moved away. If I'm like, oh no, I wanted to use that Learn, I could go back to Window and I could go down to Learn and bam, it's back on. You can also remove them by simply grabbing the tab that has their name on it, breaking it off, and then closing it. And Learn's a lot of fun, by the way. If you have some time, feel free to play around with these. I had a blast playing with a few of these a while ago. You may not have time during the semester, but we'll still be around when this class is over. We have libraries. We're not going to be using that this semester, so I'm just going to close this up. This has to do with the Creative Cloud. Honestly, the whole licensing, the software as a service thing, is just a way for them to make more money. It's better to have a copy of your work locally and backed up. If you choose to use the cloud as a backup, that's fine. But if you only have one copy somewhere, be it locally or be it only as a backup or be it only on the cloud, you could encounter problems if something goes wrong and it corrupts with that. There's also issues where you can use the library to have certain clips of clip art or files, assets, that sort of thing. If you have those only on the cloud and then suddenly you're not online, you suddenly need access to it, you can have problems. So it's a good idea to have what you need to work with you on the computer you're on. This can be an issue if you're on a laptop and you have limited space and you need to move things around. You can make those choices as you need to. Kind of difficult sometimes, but you'll get the hang of it. I'm going to go ahead and close that as well. And that leaves me with the Layers palette, the Channels palette, and Paths down here. That's perfectly great. I've got color and swatches, which will work fine. I have properties and adjustments. I'm not really going to be using the adjustments palette because you also have the adjustments icon. This used to be referred to as the black-white icon, and it's stored inside the Layers palette. Now it's just the adjustment icon. You may catch me occasionally saying black-white icon. That's why. We also have the History palette. This I'm going to break off and move over so that you can see it as I work. And I'm going to make a couple of adjustments there too. I like to use the older, wider version of my tools when possible, but sometimes space won't allow it, so it's fine to use the smaller one. The reason that I like to do that is that it just gives me quicker access. I don't have to go all the way up and down. I can just click on things. However, it's always better to use the keyboard if you can. Lastly, I'm going to go over to Edit, and I'm going to go to Preferences, and I'm going to start in General. And I'll work my way through all of these, but I only have to pick one in order to go back and forth. Let me show you what I mean. Voila. Here are the preferences. It begins on General. Later in the semester, we're going to talk about how the colors work and also how the image interpolation works. That has to do with resizing. There are a few versions of it. Bicubic automatic means that it's going to pick one of the bicubics for resize. We'll talk about that later. Don't even worry about that. We're just going to leave this on. We have auto update open documents. I'm going to leave that off. It will just ask me. During this semester, I probably won't be encountering an issue where I need to do that, but I prefer to have the choice as to whether or not a document updates if it's open. We'll talk about what that means when we get to smart objects, so don't worry about that. A lot of these we're going to talk about, so you're going to hear me repeating myself many, many times as I go through this short video. Disable the home screen. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I don't need the home screen popping up. I will leave the legacy new document interface. I like that just fine. I think the 2017 version of Creative Cloud had this automatically unchecked. They change this from time to time. I'm going to leave the transform when placing. You just have to press enter one more time. That's fine. If it starts to become annoying, I'll undo it. I'm not going to use the legacy free transform. I'm just going to use the modern one. If you prefer the older versions, this is where you can re-access it. I'm going to leave export clipboard on. I'm going to resize image during place. That's very close to the transform when placing. That should be fine. Leave that alone. Always create smart objects when placing is fine too for now. We'll cover smart objects later in the semester. Interface. I'm going to crank this up to the lighter version. I feel as though it's a little bit easier to see when recording these videos, when playing these back, than the darker ones. The dark ones I feel are better when you're working with painting projects and that sort of thing. I think it's easier on the eyes. I usually prefer dark mode, but just to be able to cleanly see where everything is for the videos, I'm going to crank this up to nice bright. Occasionally I'll have to remove my preferences and reset them, and may forget to set this back, so you'll see that toggle on and off between videos. I'm going to leave everything set to the default for now. Full screen is just referring to if you press F on the keyboard, it will toggle through this toolbar over here on the left, if you see where I've got my mouse. It has multiple modes, so if we just tell it okay. If I press F, it will remove certain aspects of the screen and eventually get you to presentation mode. And in presentation mode, this is actually really great. Holding down the spacebar to get the hand tool will let you move things all over the place. And this is really nice when you're painting on Wacom screen or any of those touch-sensitive screens, because then you can get straight to that little corner that you need to get to and not worry about it, which I love. And this is, again, just the full screen mode, and that's F. And if you click on it, you can see what they're called. Full screen mode's the last one. Full screen mode with menu bar, standard mode. This used to be called presentation mode, so you may hear me from time to time say full screen mode or presentation mode. It takes me a while to remember what version and vernacular we're using, so don't worry about that too much. I'll say some things interchangeably. And let's get back to preferences in general. All right, and we were all the way down to interface. Full screen, black. You can choose different colors if you prefer. I like the black just fine. I'm going to leave the presentation set to, well, can we increase the font size so you guys can see it better? I would love that. I'm going to try that on large and increase UI. Let's give that a go. I think that's easier to see for you guys, so we'll leave that there. Normally I wouldn't have that quite as high, but I really want you all to be able to see what's going on. All right. Tools, I'm going to quickly go through these. I don't want the animated zoom. I think that's pointless frame rate, so it will just go to where I'm trying to get it. And with the hand tool, I would like the flick to be off. So when I'm panning around with the hand, it will just move and not slide. I want control over what I'm doing. And the history log, we're just going to go ahead and skip this for now. We don't need to deal with that. File saving options, I'm going to leave these all on the default. These are fine. This is also where if you want more recent files, if you're working on a very large project and you have to jump between 30 or 40 files, you can increase that there. I'm going to leave the export at the default as well, so there won't be too much strange stuff going on. The color space conversion, we'll talk about this later in the semester. I am going to go into the preferences and increase my undo state. I feel that 75 is better. They used to have a default of 20, and they moved it up to 50, which is great. And I'm just going to leave everything else the default. If you have multiple hard drives in your computer, you can choose a different scratch disk. That's just where Adobe drops off excess data that doesn't fit in your working memory. I'm not going to worry about that in my case. I only have the one drive. If you have a smaller, faster drive, you can work on that. Keep in mind that the scratch disk will wear out a little bit faster than your normal disk. And I mean a little bit faster, as in you may have to get a new hard drive a few months before you would have before. So generally don't worry about it. In this case, I'm just going to leave this here. If you find yourself in the position where you're able to custom build a new computer, it doesn't hurt to have an additional solid state drive as a scratch disk. And then it will just load and unload things very, very quickly. The solid state drive will blow out a little bit sooner than it would have again, but nothing to be too worried about. I'm going to leave all of my cursors on the default. If I press the caps lock key, I will be able to get the precise one, which is the little X, and then turn the caps lock key off. It will go back to the normal one, only if I have it set to normal, so I'm just going to leave that alone, where it's the default. I like the red brush preview. I'll show you what that is in a little bit. I'm going to leave all the transparency gamuts normal, which is just the little squares, the checkerboard pattern you've seen before. Unit and ruler, I'm going to leave these on inches for the ruler, points for the type. It's going to work great. I'm going to leave the default on everything that it has. We're not going to worry about the pica, but this is interesting to note. By default, it is the PostScript is 72 points per inch. So when you have text and you're typing it in and you go, oh, I want to have 3 inches of text. I'm not sure how tall that is. It's not a problem. You just go over to your calculator. And then once you're in there, you do 72 times 3 and get the result there. Boom, 216. That's how big you need it if you want it to actually be 3 inches, because it's 72 per inch. Joy. Leave that alone. We'll leave all of the guides the standard, so hopefully mine will match up with yours. I won't be using guides too often throughout the semester, so we won't have to worry about that too much. We won't be using any additional plugins beyond what's provided in Photoshop. It is possible to add in more plugins, which is pretty amazing. We'll leave that alone. I'm going to use all of the defaults for the type. We're not going to mess with this right now, and we're not going to mess with type too much until the end of the semester, so we're not going to have to deal with that too much. For this class, we're not going to deal with 3D as the standard projects. I'm still considering doing a extra credit with it. We'll fill our way out on that. And I'm just going to leave the technology previews in the default. All right, that should be about it. There is one other thing. If you're using the new version of Photoshop, they've hidden this away somewhere in here. They've changed the way that undos work. It's not too different from how it used to be. Let me just get B for brush. If I were to do a little stroke and another little stroke and another little stroke, you can see that the history will have each of the brush tools strokes put in. You can step backward or forward by clicking. You can also use Control-Z to go back. Now, in the current version of Photoshop, the more recent ones, Control-Z will just step back through the history. In earlier versions of Photoshop, and now they'll call this the legacy undo, which is still stashed under preferences. Oh, I'm sorry, they moved it to, did they move it to keyboard shortcuts? They moved it to keyboard shortcuts. You can use the legacy undo instead, and this will get everything up and running. And when you Control-Z once, it will go back and then actually remove this from the history entirely. And if you Control-Z again, it will pop you back forward, so you could toggle between it. For this class, I am actually going to set it to the legacy. And heads up, the way I'm going back forward, Control-Z will go back, Control-Shift-Z, sorry, will go forward. And you can do the same sort of thing in legacy mode, so I don't see why they even did this in the first place. It was just, I believe, Control-Alt-Z was the default, but nobody ever used it, so they forced it on us. But for demonstration purposes, I need to have the legacy so that I can show you differences and toggle back and forth. So I'm just going to tell it OK. And there we go, and that will give us the defaults. So those are the settings I'm going to be using. From time to time, I will need to clear out the preferences, and if I miss a couple, you'll see things change throughout the videos where it toggles through. But that's almost 15 minutes of walking through just to change things. Hopefully this will be useful for you, and I'll see you in the next video.